Hello, everybody. It is Miss Gooding, and today I am going to talk about the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange, super interesting and exceptionally important, really is nicknamed after Christopher Columbus. You can assume that the Columbian Exchange started with his exploration, approximately 1492, but it went all the way through the 1800s, and it really did change our entire world. So, first of all, I want you to understand the difference between the Western and the Eastern hemispheres. So, the Western hemisphere is the Americas, and the Eastern hemisphere is Africa and Europe. Predominantly, we're going to talk about the New World and the Old World, and the New World being the Americas and the Old World being Europe. The slave trade was the obvious transportation against their will of African people. That doesn't really classify under the umbrella of the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange was more about foods, animals, diseases, and ideas. But the transfer of information, plants, animals, diseases between these two hemispheres. This is just a quick overview of some of the things that were exchanged during the Columbian Exchange. And so you have all sorts of foods, so sweet potatoes, avocados, peppers, etc., that went from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And then you also have a lot of things going from Europe, Africa, and Asia to the Americas. And you can always go back and pause this and take a closer look at it, but it does list some diseases, foods, animals, things like that. So the Columbian Exchange Columbus had quite a few voyages, and they had great impact around the world. They had consequences around the world as well. There were biological consequences, so the issue of diseases spreading and people not being immune to these diseases. And so entire cultures really being wiped out by smallpox or measles. There were a lot of cultural shifts as well because of the Columbian Exchange. And these cultural shifts were largely due to the exchange of ideas. And what I'm talking about with regards to the exchange of ideas are the ideas of religion, philosophy, literature, and how dynamic some of them were and how they spread or were forced to spread, especially with religion, around the world. So the Columbian Exchange, if you were to want a definition, I like this definition, but it's the worldwide redistribution of plants, animals, and diseases that resulted from the initial contacts between Europeans and natives in the Americas. All right, so again, you can go back and kind of take a look a little bit more closely, but these were the items that went from the Old World to the New World. And so some of these plants were rice and wheat and barley, oats, etc. You also had items, plants going from the New World to the Old World, and those were avocados and guavas and peanuts and corn and potatoes, etc. From the Old World, or Europe, to the New World, the animals that were exchanged were horses and cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and chickens. And from the New World to the Old World, animal-wise, llamas, alpacas, and guinea pigs. All right. Sadly, the Columbian Exchange was also an introduction of diseases to various different parts of the world. And so from the Old World to the New World were diseases like measles, chickenpox, smallpox, yellow fever, malaria, influenza, and the common cold. And this young man here is suffering from smallpox. Also, there were diseases that went from the New World to the Old World, diseases such as syphilis, hepatitis, polio, and tuberculosis. So in class, what we're going to do is we're going to turn and talk with a neighbor about what were some of the effects of the Columbian Exchange. Like, what is the big takeaway? Like, how did the Columbian Exchange affect the world? What were some of the big ways that it did that? And so if you are just watching this video, go ahead and think about that right now. And here are some of the options. I mean, there's probably more than this, but some of the effects of the Columbian Exchange were that both hemispheres were introduced to new foods and animals that changed entire societies. The introduction of the potato, in Ireland changed, how they farmed and how they ate. So that's just an example. Potatoes and corn became major food sources for Europeans, allowing populations to increase greatly. So the exchange of these food items and these farming techniques allowed people to be either more successful or not with regards to the foods that they grew and their farming techniques. Also, the introduction of pigs and cows and horses gave new sources, food sources, and new animals for Native Americans to use. And so it really expanded their way of living in some ways, and it probably limited them in others. It also introduced new diseases to the different continents, and largely and unfortunately made the conquest of the Americas a lot easier for Europeans, simply because not only were Native Americans, especially here in the United States, we'll talk about that in U.S. history, is that often the Native Americans were devastated by warfare, but they were even more devastated by diseases. The diseases would kill entire tribes, entire communities. And if it didn't kill them, it weakened them. And so the conquest of the Americas were done more easily because of disease. And that's a huge reason or a huge effect of the Columbian Exchange.